I was sitting on the couch when my 15-year-old daughter smiled at her phone. I didn't know homework could be so charming, I said with a grin. Suddenly, she stormed into her room. I have a boyfriend. Okay, Dad, are you happy now? I took a deep breath. When do I get to meet him? The door flew open. You can't meet him yet, please, Dad. Not until I turn 16, then I'll explain everything. Bristol, if someone's threatening you or no one's threatening me, why do you have to make everything so weird? Before I could respond, my phone rang. My son Jacob calling from the University of Michigan. Hey, buddy, what's his Bristol dating someone? His voice was strained and urgent, like something was seriously wrong. Dad, listen to me very carefully. Do not investigate this. Give her until her birthday. Jacob, you're scaring me. Is my daughter in danger? No, nothing like that. Just trust her, okay? 2 weeks passed and I tried to respect Bristol's privacy until the most insane thing happened. She started doing her own laundry twice a week. This was the same teenager who refused to learn how to use a vacuum. I was emptying Bristol's hamper when I found this oversized University of Michigan hoodie. Jacob's school. When she got home from school, I held it up casually. This, yours? Her face went red. Oh yeah, it's my boyfriend. Thrift store. It's a boyfriend-style hoodie from a thrift store. She grabbed it from me and hurried to her room. That night, I walked past Bristol's room around 2 a.m. to get water and heard her on the phone. Voice muffled but urgent. I know, but I can't keep doing this. The lying is killing me. A pause. My dad will kill us when he finds out who you are. You know he will. The next morning, Bristol came down the next morning, wearing a turtleneck in the summer. New fashion choice? I asked, just trying something different. But when she reached for orange juice, the turtleneck shifted and I saw her frantically adjust it to cover it. She saw me looking and practically ran back to her room. First decided to wait until Mother's Day to confront them. We always visited his mom's grave together. Sorry, Dad, I have a huge project due on Monday. It's Mother's Day, Jacob. I know, I'm sorry. An hour later, Bristol announced she couldn't come either because she was sleeping over at Ashley's. When I called Ashley's mom to confirm, she sounded confused but said yes, Bristol could come over. The pattern became undeniable. After that, every time Jacob mentioned coming home, Bristol had plans. Every time she wasn't home, he was too busy to call. That night, I confronted her gently. Before I could get a word out, she screamed, "Why can't you just trust me?" She stormed off. But the worst part was 2 days later. Bristol came home with her hair chopped short, her beautiful, long hair she'd been lathering with castor oil since middle school. My boyfriend likes it better this way, she said, running her fingers through it self-consciously. The college savings withdrawals were the final straw. $300 transferred to her checking account, and all the charges showed up near Jacob's campus. When I asked, she claimed it was for SAT prep but couldn't look me in the eye. That's how I spent Mother's Day, driving to Michigan. Jacob's apartment was off campus. I knocked, my heart pounding. Jacob opened the door and his face went white. Dad, we need to talk about Bristol. That's when I heard her voice from inside. Is that the pizza? Standing behind him was Bristol in a slinky bathrobe barely covering her body in messy makeup. We all stood there in silence. Dad, Jacob started. Remember, this is legal. Bristol isn't your biological daughter, Jacob said quietly. She's your wife's daughter. We're not related by blood. We're step siblings. I stared at him in shock. Jacob, she's 15. You're a sophomore in college. We fell in love, Bristol said through tears. We couldn't fight it. Plus, I'm 16 soon. I stopped listening after that and swung my fist at my own son, knocking him to the ground. My knuckles hurt bad and I just stood there, watching Jacob grab his nose while blood ran between his fingers. Bristol screamed something at me and rushed over to help him up, trying to hold her robe closed with one hand. I saw the blood dripping onto the carpet and my brain finally caught up with what I'd just done to my own kid. My whole body started shaking and I backed out of the doorway into the hall, almost tripping over my own feet. Jacob yelled that he was calling the cops, but Bristol grabbed his arm and begged him not to, saying it would make everything worse for everyone. I told them both this wasn't over and turned around to leave before I did something else stupid. The walk to my car felt like a dream, and I fumbled with my keys 3 times before getting the door open. Driving home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel, and I kept seeing Bristol in that tiny robe standing behind my son. I had to pull over at a gas station to throw up in the parking lot. Then again, at a rest stop 20 minutes later, when the image hit me again, my phone kept buzzing, and when I finally looked at it, at a red light, there were 17 missed calls from Bristol. I turned it off and kept driving. When I got home, I just Sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. The house was dark and empty, and I dropped onto the couch without turning on any lights. I couldn't sleep at all that night, just sat there staring at nothing and trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to drive back and drag her home, but I knew that would probably get me arrested after what I'd already done. Around 4 in the morning, I realized I needed help from people who knew how to handle this kind of thing. Monday morning came and I called Child Protective Services right at 8 when they opened. The woman who answered sounded tired until I explained my college son was involved with my 15-year-old stepdaughter. Then her voice got serious real fast. She asked a bunch of questions and scheduled someone to come to my house later in the week. 2 days crawled by before Wednesday, when Paige Morrow showed up at my door, carrying a thick folder and wearing a serious look on her face. She sat at my kitchen table and explained they'd need to talk to Bristol at the school without me there, investigate Jacob, and make some kind of safety plan. I handed her everything I'd collected over the past few weeks, including the bank statements and the Michigan hoodie. That evening, after she left, I sat at my computer for hours making a timeline of everything I'd noticed going back months. The money transfers to Bristol's account, finding the hoodie, hearing the late-night phone calls. Everything went into a document. I took screenshots of bank records and saved text messages, putting it all in a folder on my desktop while my hands shook typing. Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a text from Jacob saying they were really in love and I was overreacting about the age thing. He wrote that nothing sexual happened until recently and begged me not to ruin his life over this. I didn't write back, but took a screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Friday turned into a mess of phone calls trying to figure out who was supposed to handle this since Jacob lived in a different county near campus. The campus police said it was our home county's problem, but our county said the university was involved, so it was complicated. I spent 3 hours on hold getting transferred between departments. I finally called Ashley's mom to check on all those sleepovers Bristol claimed to have. She went quiet when I explained why I was asking, then told me Bristol had only stayed over twice in the past 6 months. She sounded sick when she realized she'd been helping them without knowing it, and said she'd write down everything she remembered for the authorities. We both kept apologizing to each other, even though neither of us knew what was really happening. Monday morning, Paige called to say she'd be interviewing Bristol at the school that afternoon, and I couldn't be there for it. Standard protocol, she said, but it made my stomach hurt thinking about my daughter facing questions alone. I spent the whole day at work checking my phone every 5 minutes and getting nothing done. When Bristol got home, she slammed the front door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. She screamed that I was ruining her life and told them lies about Jacob being some kind of predator when they were in love. I tried to explain I was protecting her, but she ran to her room and locked the door. Around 7 that night, Paige called back and said there were concerning patterns in how Bristol answered questions about the relationship. She wouldn't give specifics, but said they'd need to do follow-up interviews and create a safety plan. Tuesday morning, I called around for lawyers and got an appointment with Ken Roberts for that afternoon. His office was in this old building downtown and smelled like leather and coffee. Ken was maybe 60, with gray hair and looked tired, but listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and told me straight up I could face assault charges for punching Jacob. My hands started sweating when he explained Michigan law didn't care that Jacob was with my underage daughter. Assault was assault, but he also said we could file for a protective order to keep Jacob away from Bristol since she was a minor. The paperwork took 2 hours, and my hand cramped from writing the same information over and over. Ken made copies of everything and said he'd file it tomorrow morning. Wednesday, he called to say the order was filed, but warned me to document everything and avoid any contact with Jacob. He said my punch could actually help Jacob's defense lawyer argue I was violent and unstable. That made me want to throw up, because I realized my anger might have given my son a way to avoid consequences. Ken told me to focus on protecting Bristol now and let the legal system handle Jacob. Thursday night, I sat Bristol down and explained the new rules starting immediately. 7 p.m. curfew on the school nights, 8 on weekends, no phone after 9, and no going anywhere without telling me first. She jumped up and threw her plate at the wall where it shattered and food went everywhere. She screamed that I was worse than prison and she hated me more than anything in the world. The neighbors probably heard her yelling about how I was destroying her life over nothing. She ran to her room and slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the hallway wall. I cleaned up the broken plate and food while my hands shook, then sat at the kitchen table trying not to cry. Friday morning, I found an email from Jacob in my inbox sent at 3 a.m. He wrote 4 pages about how their relationship started when Bristol visited campus for a prospective student weekend back in February. He claimed They tried to fight their feelings, but couldn't help falling in love over late night talks about books and music. Reading his words about how special and mature she was made me realize this had been going on for months while I had no idea. He kept saying it wasn't planned, and they both felt guilty about the secrecy, but knew I'd never understand. The more I read, the more I saw the pattern of a college kid manipulating his younger stepsister. Saturday, I forwarded everything to Paige and spent hours going through Jacob's email again, marking every red flag. The way he talked about waiting until she was older, keeping things secret for now, how nobody else would understand their connection. Classic grooming behavior from someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I printed everything and highlighted the worst parts where he coached her on lying to me. Sunday afternoon, I remembered we had a shared family cloud account from years ago and logged in to check. There were hundreds of messages between them going back to January before that campus visit. Screenshots showed Jacob telling Bristol exactly what to say when I asked questions, how to delete messages, when to pretend she was at Ashley's. I copied everything onto a flash drive and made 3 backup copies to give to Paige and Ken. 2 weeks passed with Bristol barely speaking to me and following the rules only because she had no choice. Then Wednesday, she didn't come home from the school. I called the school and they said she left at normal time. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I drove around checking her friends' houses, but nobody had seen her. By 6 p.m., I called the police and filed a missing person report. The officer asked about custody issues or family problems, and I had to explain about Jacob and the protection order. They put out an alert and started tracking her phone, which showed up at an address in Michigan near campus. My whole body went cold when I saw the location on the map. The officer said they'd contact local police for a welfare check, but it would take time. I sat in the police station for 3 hours, drinking bad coffee and checking my phone every 30 seconds. Finally, around 10 p.m., an officer came out and said they found her at Jacob's apartment. She was safe, but insisted she went there voluntarily and wasn't being held against her will. Michigan police couldn't force her to leave since she wasn't in immediate danger, but they strongly encouraged her to come home. 2 officers brought her back around 1 a.m. and she wouldn't even look at me. She went straight to her room, but not before calling me a traitor and saying she'd never forgive me for sending cops after her like she was some runaway criminal. The next morning, the school counselor called asking for an urgent meeting about Bristol's attendance and emotional state. She'd missed 8 days in the last month, and teachers reported she wasn't turning in work or participating in class. The counselor said Bristol showed clear signs of trauma, even though she insisted everything was fine, and she just wanted everyone to leave her alone. We scheduled an appointment with Abigail Morgan, who specialized in family crisis situations, for the following Monday. Came faster than I expected, and suddenly it was Monday morning with Paige calling to tell me the prosecutor's office was taking over the criminal part. She said I needed to step back completely and let them handle everything from here while I focused on getting Bristol into therapy with Abigail. The whole system felt impossible to trust, but I signed the papers agreeing to their plan anyway. 3 days into this new arrangement, Bristol found out about Javier through some post on Instagram and came down to dinner already mad. She grabbed her plate and threw it straight at the wall, screaming that I turned everyone against Jacob, and when she turned 16 in 4 months she'd file for emancipation. Food went everywhere, and she ran upstairs before I could say anything. I spent an hour cleaning pasta sauce off the wall while trying not to punch something myself. The next week we had our first joint therapy session with Abigail, where I finally admitted I messed up by punching Jacob and trying to control everything afterward. Bristol's eyes went wide when I said I was wrong, and she actually agreed to work on not screaming at me if I worked on not being so controlling. Abigail wrote something down and called it a breakthrough, which felt weird since we were just agreeing to basic stuff. 2 weeks later, we had the protection order, hearing where the judge extended it temporarily while the prosecutors figured out what to charge Jacob with. Ken told me afterward that my assault case was reviewed for misdemeanor charges, which could mean fines or even jail time. Both cases moved through the court slower than I could believe. A month passed before Bristol tried something stupid by taking a bus to campus, even though the safety plan said no contact at all. Campus security called me saying Jacob had reported her being there trying to find his new dorm, which at least showed he was taking the legal stuff seriously. Now, the officer said Bristol was in their office waiting for pickup and seemed upset but not hurt. I drove the whole way there without music, just thinking about what to say. But when I got there, I didn't lecture her at all. The drive home was completely silent with her waiting for me to explode. But I just told her I was glad she was safe when we pulled into our driveway. She looked at me funny and went inside without slamming her door. for once, which felt like more progress than all the therapy combined. During our next session with Abigail, we worked out new rules where Bristol got some phone time back and a later curfew if she told me exactly where she was going, and when she'd be back. She agreed to follow the rules if I gave her more freedom, which wasn't perfect, but beat the constant fighting we'd been doing. Abigail helped us write it all down like a contract we both signed. 3 days after that agreement, the university sent a letter saying Jacob was under interim suspension pending a conduct review about his relationship with a minor. He had to move to temporary housing away from his regular apartment while they investigated everything. Bristol saw the letter on the kitchen counter and went quiet for the rest of the day, which was weird since legal threats never seemed to affect her before. That Sunday, I drove to the cemetery alone and sat by my wife's grave for 2 hours talking out loud about everything that happened. I told her I'd try to be more patient instead of just punishing Bristol, and remember she was hurting too, even if she showed it by being angry all the time. The groundskeeper walked by twice, probably thinking I was crazy, but sitting there helped me find some peace I hadn't felt in months. Ken called the next morning saying the prosecutors offered Jacob a plea deal for misdemeanor charges with something called deferred sentencing if he kept the no-contact order. He explained it meant Jacob wouldn't go to jail but would have a record, and any violation would mean immediate prosecution. First wanted more than that after what he did, but Ken said it was actually decent, considering the circumstances and my own assault charge. The deal meant Jacob admitted wrongdoing without a trial, which would spare Bristol from testifying about everything. I struggled with accepting such a light punishment, but Ken reminded me the goal was protecting Bristol, not revenge. The prosecutor needed my input by Friday, so I had 4 days to decide whether this was enough justice for what my son did. Bristol didn't know about the plea deal yet, and I wasn't sure when or how to tell her since she still defended Jacob, sometimes even after everything. Part of me worried she'd see it as me going easy on him, while another part worried she'd hate me more for any punishment at all. Wednesday, I called Ken back and agreed to support the plea deal, even though it felt like letting Jacob off easy for grooming and manipulating his stepsister. He said the paperwork would move forward and Jacob would have to appear in court next month to formally accept the terms. The whole legal process felt both too slow and too fast, at the same time, with consequences that seemed both too harsh and not harsh enough. 2 days after agreeing to the plea deal, Ken called saying Jacob's lawyer wanted to deliver something to our house. I waited on the porch when a courier showed up with an envelope marked for me and one for Bristol. Mine contained a handwritten letter from Jacob on legal pad paper, 3 pages of neat printing I recognized from years of homework help. He wrote about taking full responsibility for pursuing Bristol, acknowledging the age gap made it wrong. No matter what he felt, he didn't ask for forgiveness or try to explain anything away. He just stated facts about maintaining the no-contact order and respecting boundaries going forward. The letter felt different from his earlier messages, less defensive and more accepting of what he'd done. Bristol came home from the school and saw the envelope with her name. She asked to read it in her room alone. I handed it over without arguing, watching her walk upstairs slowly like she was carrying something heavy. She stayed up there for 2 hours without any music or phone sounds coming through the door. When she came down for dinner, she didn't mention the letter at all. Over the next week, I noticed Bristol stopped bringing up Jacob during arguments. She didn't defend him when I mentioned the legal stuff. She didn't claim I was ruining true love or being unfair. During our Thursday session with Abigail, Bristol sat quietly for 10 minutes before admitting the letter made her feel confused. She said Jacob accepting the no-contact order so easily hurt more than she expected. Abigail asked her what she thought that meant. Bristol shrugged, but I could see her processing something important. The reality of Jacob moving on with his life while she was stuck in high school seemed to be sinking in finally. June arrived with school ending and summer stretching ahead of us. We worked out a schedule with morning chores, afternoon, summer school, and limited evening activities with approved friends. Bristol complained, but not with the explosive anger from before. We were both tired from months of screaming, matches, and slammed doors. The house felt quieter but not exactly peaceful. Summer school enrollment happened without a fight. She picked English and math to make up credits she'd missed during the worst of everything. I drove her the first day and watched her walk in with her backpack, looking more like the kid she actually was instead of someone trying to be older. The routine helped both of us. Chores at 9, summer school at noon, home by 4, dinner at 6. Structure made things predictable, which we both needed. Our family therapy session the week before her birthday focused on expectations. Abigail asked Bristol directly what she hoped would change when she turned 16. Bristol looked at her hands for a long time before saying she knew the no-contact order wouldn't change. She understood Jacob couldn't be part of her life regardless of her age. Abigail asked how she felt about that. Bristol said it sucked but she got it. That acceptance felt huge after months of her insisting everything would be fine once she wasn't 15 anymore. I wanted to celebrate this breakthrough but kept my mouth shut. Small victories needed to stay small or they turn into fights. My court date for the assault charge came up in late June. Ken had worked out the disorderly conduct plea with fines and anger management classes instead of jail time. The courtroom was mostly empty except for us, the prosecutor and Jacob sitting in the back row. I stood when the judge asked if I understood the charges. I said yes and accepted responsibility for losing control that day. The judge sentenced me to pay $800 in fines plus 12 weeks of anger management. Jacob left before I finished the paperwork. That evening, Bristol asked if I was mad about the conviction. I told her I deserved consequences for punching someone, even Jacob. She seemed surprised by my answer. 2 nights later, I walked past Bristol's room and heard her on the phone with someone. Through the door, I heard her say she was deleting his number now. She wasn't crying or dramatic about it. The next morning, she mentioned casually during breakfast that she'd boxed up the Michigan hoodie and some other stuff. She asked if we could donate it somewhere. I said sure and didn't make a big deal about it. Abigail had taught me to acknowledge progress without overwhelming celebration that might cause backsliding. Father's Day came on a Sunday with no special plans. I woke up to Bristol making noise in the kitchen. She'd made scrambled eggs and toast, even attempted coffee in the machine. We sat at the table together for the first time in months without phones or distractions. She mentioned missing her mom. I said I missed her, too. We talked for maybe 5 minutes about small memories, nothing heavy. She'd made my coffee with 2 sugars just how I liked it. The gesture meant more than any card could have. Summer school kept Bristol busy during the days. She met 2 girls in her English class who didn't go to her regular school. They didn't know anything about Jacob or the whole mess. I'd see them laughing at the pickup area, making plans for the mall or movies, normal teenage stuff that made my chest feel lighter. One afternoon, I watched from the car as Bristol showed them something on her phone and they all cracked up. Her laugh sounded real, not forced or fake. These new friends invited her to a pool party for the 4th of July. I met the parents, verified supervision, and let her go. Progress looked like trusting her with normal activities again. My anger management classes started the first week of July. The instructor was this older guy who'd been teaching the course for 20 years. He had us introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. I said I punched my son after discovering something disturbing. He nodded like he'd heard worse. The techniques were actually helpful, especially the stuff about recognizing physical warning signs before losing control. We learned breathing exercises and counting methods. I practiced them at home when Bristol tested boundaries. One evening, I shared the counting technique with her when she was getting worked up about curfew. She actually tried it instead of mocking me. By the 3rd week of classes, I understood better how grief from losing my wife had made everything else feel more threatening. The instructor explained how unprocessed loss could make people react violently to protect what remained. That hit home hard. Late July brought news through mutual friends that Jacob had graduated but skipped the ceremony. Someone's mom who worked at the university mentioned seeing his name on the list but not seeing him walk. Bristol was doing homework at the kitchen table when I got the text. I watched her face as I mentioned it. Casually, she paused her writing for maybe 10 seconds. Her eyes got watery, but she blinked it away and went back to her math problems. Later that night, I heard her crying softly in her room, but she didn't come to me and I didn't go to her. Something she needed to process alone. The next week, Abigail sat us down in her office and pulled out her calendar. She flipped through the pages and suggested we could move to every other week now since we'd been making real progress. Bristol shifted in her seat and said she wanted to keep coming through summer to work on her own stuff. Abigail nodded and penciled us in. For the next 2 months, I went back to work full-time the following Monday. After taking reduced hours for 3 months, my desk was covered in dust and old coffee cups from before everything happened. My CO workers kept stopping by to check on me and mentioned I seemed different, calmer somehow. The routine of spreadsheets and meetings felt good. After months of chaos, I'd catch myself actually focusing on quarterly reports instead of checking my phone every 5 minutes for bad news. Bristol started hanging out with those girls from summer school more often. One afternoon, she came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and asked if she could get a job at the ice cream shop downtown where her new friend worked. I put down the spatula and we talked about hours and how she'd get there. She promised to keep it under 15 hours a week and said the friend's mom could drive them both. I said yes, but made her promise to keep her grades up when school started. She actually jumped up and hugged me quick, before running to text her friends. 3 days later, Ken called to tell me the prosecutor was closing Jacob's case, since he completed all the plea requirements, no jail time, but he'd have a record that would follow him forever. I found Bristol doing homework at the kitchen table and told her the news quietly. She stopped writing and stared at her notebook for a long time. Then she asked if she could go to her room, and I said sure. I heard her door closed softly, not the usual slam. August came fast and we sat at the computer together picking classes for junior year. She scrolled through electives and stopped at drama club, asking if she could join. I said of course and watched her type her name on the sign-up sheet. She picked creative writing too and seemed excited about the teacher everyone said was cool. We printed out her schedule and she stuck it on the fridge with a magnet. Her first day at the ice cream shop went well, and she came home with chocolate sauce on her shirt and $20 in tips. She showed me how to work the soft serve machine by demonstrating with a spoon and her hands. The other girls from work came over that weekend and they spent hours in her room laughing about customers and practicing for drama auditions. One evening after dinner, Bristol stayed at the table instead of disappearing to her room. She picked at her placemat and said therapy had been talking about healthy relationships and warning signs. She told me she understood now how keeping secrets and not having other friends were red flags she'd missed. She said Jacob had convinced her that nobody would understand their connection. I just listened without interrupting. She talked for maybe 10 minutes about boundaries and trust before going to do dishes without being asked. The last week of August, I suggested we go to the lake for a weekend before school started. She looked surprised but said, okay. We packed the car with fishing poles and snacks and drove 2 hours north. At the lake, she actually left her phone in the cabin and helped me carry the tackle box to the dock. We sat there for hours, not really talking, just casting lines and reeling them in. She squealed when something tugged her line and I helped her reel in a decent-sized bass. She held it up for a picture, smiling real and wide for the first time since Mother's Day. We threw it back and kept fishing until sunset. The week before school started, I was reading in the living room when Bristol came downstairs in her pajamas. She stood there for a second like she was deciding something. Then she walked over and gave me a quick hug. Good night. Not a long dramatic thing, just a normal daughter hugging her dad before bed. She smelled like the vanilla lotion her mom used to buy. I said goodnight and she went upstairs. We weren't fixed and probably never would be completely, but we were still here, still trying, still a family that had survived something terrible. The next morning, she made eggs again and we talked about her work schedule and which supplies she still needed for school. Normal stuff that felt like the biggest gift in the world. Well, that's going to do it for now. Thanks for just being here and exploring all these curious details with me. Always enjoy sharing this time with you.